Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Gaulin.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Gastro Girl podcast. I'm your host, Jacqueline Gaulin, and today we're diving deep into the role of fiber and gut health. We're here today with our special guest, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, also known as Dr. B. He's a board-certified gastroenterologist, a gut health expert, and the New York Times bestselling author of Fiber Fueled, as well as a related cookbook. Dr. B has helped thousands of people improve their digestive health through diet, and today he's here to share some practical advice with us. Thank you for joining us, Dr. B. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Well, you have an amazing Instagram presence with great tips and insights. You also have an amazing website. And I thought it would be great to have you on the show to talk about the importance of the role of diet and what we eat in our gut health. I mean, we're inundated day in and day out by social media feeds telling us we should eat this, that, we should take this or that. And it's overwhelming. Patients are confused and our poor guts are just in turmoil, right?
Yeah.
So can you explain in simple terms why what we eat is so important to our gut health?
Yeah. We've had this research going back to the 80s and the 90s that showed us, if you eat this way, you reduce your risk of heart disease, you reduce your risk of cancer, you are less likely to have diabetes. And the problem is that it all kind of goes through a black box in a way. It's hard for us to wrap our mind around this sort of just blank concept of, if you eat this food, you'll be better, over the course of 50 years. On some level, I think we need to be able to see in action how our food choices affect us. And that's where the gut microbiome comes in. And I'm not here to claim that the gut microbiome is the only thing that matters for human health. But I do sincerely believe that this is a powerful part of what makes us healthy humans and something that we should be putting our attention on in terms of how we choose to live our lives, including the foods that we eat. And so to answer your question, Jacqueline, we know from research, there was actually a study by Lawrence David out of Duke University back in 2014 that was published in the journal Nature, where he showed that literally within the first 24 hours of making a dietary change, our microbiome is already starting to make a shift. So the food choices that we make today will start to influence our gut microbiome by tomorrow. And I'm sure that your listeners have heard about the gut microbiome, but just in case, these are 38 trillion microbes, mostly bacteria that live inside of our intestines, mostly in the large intestine or the colon. And they are connected to our digestion, which is access to nutrients. But they're also powerfully connected to our immune system, to our metabolism, our hormones, our mood, our brain health. So really what we're talking about is this aspect, this part of our body that's really powerful in terms of human health and quite fascinating because it's not even human.
I never can get enough of the microbiome. And I think our listeners feel the same because we're learning so much more about the role of the microbiome in our overall health and wellness. So we never can talk about it too much. So don't worry about that. But for someone who's listening in and, really wants to start improving their gut health through diet, what are some of the practical changes that they can make?
Well, I guess let me bring forward some of my greatest hits because these are things that I have been kind of talking about publicly through my different media channels. And then I wrote 2 books that really are based on these ideas. So I first of all think that fiber is absolutely essential. And fiber is a complex carbohydrate that we get from plant-based foods. And it kind of needs like a refresh in terms of its the way that we think about it. Because too many of us, if I say the word fiber, the first thing that you conjure in your mind is grandma stirring an orange drink so that she can poop, right? And I I personally see fiber as this like sexy thing. And I want other people to see it the way that I do. So just to kind of unpack that for a quick moment, fiber, which is found in plant-based foods, all plant-based foods have fiber. It is not digested by human enzymes. And so as a result of that, it's able to work its way through our intestine, arrive down into the colon, still intact, And when it gets there, your gut microbes, they are in a line, holding arms and doing a kick line and basically singing with great joy because this is their favorite food. Fiber is food for your gut microbes. This is why we call it a prebiotic. And they get to work in teams. They actually like there's different ones that will come in at different times using specialized enzymes that they have to unpack the fiber. And it actually stops being fiber and it turns into this thing called short chain fatty acids. And these are the most healing, most anti inflammatory compounds, chemicals that I've come across in my more than 20 years of studying medicine. So, fiber becomes this powerful thing. And I'm happy to dig into any of those sort of arenas wherever you want to go with the conversation in terms of the effects of these short chain fatty acids that we get from fiber on these different aspects of our health. But the key is that 95% of Americans are deficient in fiber as we sit here today. And that is highly problematic because fiber, when adequately consumed, has been shown to lower our risk of heart disease, lower our likelihood of having a heart attack, lower our risk of many different forms of developing cancer, lower our likelihood of dying of cancer, lower our risk of having a stroke or having diabetes. There's so many benefits. And I sincerely believe that if we just addressed this one issue and we normalized fiber within our diet, we would radically transform our health on an individual basis and across our culture, across society.
So I'm here to help you make fiber fashionable.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's important. And I hear, like we talked before we started recording this episode, I hear from so many patients, I hear from my own friends that are struggling with constipation, bloating. They feel miserable. They're not eating enough fiber. Some of them are on those weight loss drugs. So they're, jacking up the protein. There's no fiber in their diet and they're absolutely miserable. Like
Mhm.
what, let's just go back to the basics and give people a basic understanding of what fiber is. You did a good job, and how they can increase the fiber and what that role is and the importance of those short chain fatty acids in our overall health and gut health.
Yeah. So fiber is, I believe I mentioned this earlier, but I'll take it further that it's a complex carbohydrate. And so, like when we vilify carbs, I kind of get a little bit offended because we're talking about fiber. Fiber is a carb. And it's found in plant based foods. So that includes all fruits, vegetables, whole grains, seeds, nuts, and legumes. They all have fiber. Additionally, mushrooms actually have fiber. And I add that because mushrooms technically are not plants, they're actually fungi. So this is where we find it. It's not particularly hard to find if you just simply eat dishes that contain those different foods. And, most people have heard that there's these different types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. So, what's the deal with that? So, insoluble fiber is the stuff that it's what we would call the grit or the roughage. It's the part that will never break down. You can put it into a drink, you can heat it up, you could boil it, it doesn't matter. You'll still have that grit, it'll still be there. And the insoluble fiber is more like our traditional view of fiber, Jacqueline. So, the traditional view is that fiber runs through you, right? It's just like this thing that sweeps through. You have a big bowel movement, there goes your fiber into the toilet. That's insoluble fiber, right? That's the classic view. It's the soluble fiber that I get excited about. Soluble means that if I were to put it into a beverage and stir it up, it would disappear. It would dissolve. You wouldn't even know that it's there. And yet it is there. And that fiber will work its way through the 25 feet of your intestine to get down to the colon. And that's the soluble fiber is the type of fiber that typically is going to be processed by our gut bacteria. And they use that to basically create the short chain fatty acids. And those short chain fatty acids that I described as being anti-inflammatory, this is when we talk about some of the benefits of fiber in our diet, reducing our risk of heart disease, lowering our blood pressure, lowering our cholesterol, improving our blood sugar control, protecting us from colorectal cancer, lowering our risk of having a stroke, or you go down the line. There's so many different benefits. These are attributed to the short chain fatty acids. Butyrate, acetate, and propionate. Those are the short chain fatty acids. And they will have healing effects right there in your colon, right there in your intestine. But they will also get into the bloodstream, spread throughout the entire body, and they'll have healing effects on the blood brain barrier. They'll actually cross the blood brain barrier into your brain. And we have data that suggests that they can affect our mood, can affect our risk of Alzheimer's disease, our risk of Parkinson's disease. So it's quite fascinating to consider the power that exists with quite simply consuming more fiber.
No, that makes so much sense. And I think, you hit the nail on the head when you say, we've become such a society that like shuns carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are important because it fuels the body, and they've become like, oh, stay away from them. But it seems like when our society kind of pushed into that realm of low carb, there seem to be like, look at probably historically what's happening to our gut microbiome, what's happening to our incidences of more like IBS and other GI symptoms. I mean, do you see correlations in that in the research that you're familiar with?
I do. And I think that the important thing that I would propose to the audience at home is that there are, we apply these general labels,
Right.
right? So high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, high protein, low protein. And I feel like we need to be more precise in our language because there's many forms of carbs. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. There's many forms of fat. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. There's many forms of protein. Some of them are more healthy than others. So I think to me, what it kind of comes back to is trying to construct a healthful diet. And there are ways in which you could construct a low carb diet and have it be healthful. It absolutely can be done. But really, to me, the way that you accomplish this is still by including the fiber. There's not really a way to do a low carb diet that would get my stamp of approval by having it be low on fiber.
So what would you say to our listeners who are struggling with GI symptoms? A lot of them have IBS. They've tried things like the low FODMAP diet. How do you or just people that are just generally not feeling well? They're bloated, they're constipated, they're just exhausted of trying to figure out what to eat. Like, how do you construct that diet that's not only good for your gut health, but your overall health and wellness? Like, what are your suggestions on how to build that? And you've got some great resources on your website. You get an amazing masterclass. But if you could provide some tips and some insights for our listeners, that would be so helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I think that my personal mission is about education and empowerment of individual people so that they can understand their own body and what's happening. And the acknowledgement that there's nuance to these things. So I'll be honest with you, Jacqueline, I cringe a little bit when the entire world makes it sound like every single person who's constipated needs to ratchet up their fiber aggressively, right? And that might actually sound paradoxical or like counterintuitive considering I just spent the last 15, 20 minutes talking about how wonderful fiber is,
Right.
right? And that we're all deficient. So if I could unpack that real quick, let me go after this.
Yes, please.
All right. So when we talk about fiber, and I mentioned this earlier, but let me bring it back onto the table. When we process and digest our fiber, that is 100% the result of our microbiome. 100%. There is no human enzyme that's digesting your fiber. So for a person who has a damaged gut microbiome, such as we would find in IBS or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or many other digestive health conditions, it's not really a big surprise that it's easy to overwhelm their microbiome and that they would struggle with fiber. They're on a low fiber diet. Their gut is not used to processing it. And then if you suddenly eat the 4-bean chili because you heard Dr. B talk about how great fiber is for you, right? That's my fault.
Right.
Because the problem is you then are completely overwhelming those systems and you're going to get gas and bloating and you're going to get uncomfortable. And if you're constipated and you poop, cool. That's great. You're going to feel better.
Right.
But if you don't poop, which is often the case in people that have moderate or severe constipation, actually they get more bloated and they get more constipated and they don't feel well. So how do we go about this? All right. The solution to this, Jacqueline, is number one, if you are constipated, we have to get your bowels moving. All right. No, that's number one. We have to get your bowels moving. And the way that we accomplish this, if you have mild constipation, which means like you once in a while constipated, but most days you're okay and you're pooping. For that person, increasing their fiber, increasing their water intake, some exercise, that can get the job done. But for the people who come to a gastroenterologist, they have moderate or severe constipation. It's more complicated than that. And there's entire techniques to how we go about this, different treatment options. Where I many times like to start is by treating with magnesium. Now, this is not for everyone, but the three forms of magnesium that I'll use, magnesium citrate, magnesium sulfate, or magnesium oxide. These are the ones that I like to use for constipation. And typically I'll have my patients take it before bedtime. I'll start at 500 milligrams and I'll slowly titrate up until we find the amount that we need. Now, you don't want to do this if you have kidney issues. You definitely want to do this in conjunction with your doctor. But the beautiful thing about magnesium is that once you get on a stable dose, you can check your magnesium level and make sure that your blood magnesium level is exactly where you want it to be. Get the bowels moving first. Once the bowels are moving, we can bring fiber on board. And now fiber is your friend and it's going to help you to keep your bowels moving. Because fiber within that context of moving bowels actually is really good at keeping them moving through. When we add the fiber, no matter who you are, constipated, not constipated, if you have underlying gut issues, start low and go slow.
No, I think this is important advice because we have heard of magnesium and we do get questions about that. And I like the fact that you're empowering patients so they can take this information to their provider. Because how do you know which type of magnesium that you should take? The citrate, the sulfate, or the oxide, right? You said you identified three of them. So how do you know which one? You would have to ask your doctor, correct?
From my perspective, making sure that this is the right choice for you is about your relationship with your doctor. You shouldn't be hearing me on a podcast and then taking action without having the oversight, right, of someone who really knows your full health history. There are some people that this is not the right choice, right? Like, as I said, particularly people that have kidney issues. The reason why I call out those three is that there's many forms of magnesium that are at your drugstore. And that includes magnesium glycinate, magnesium threonate. Okay, those ones, they're good for sleep. They're good for mood, but they will not make you poop. And so
Yeah.
some people will sit here and say, but Dr. B, I'm taking magnesium. Okay, show me the bottle. And if I look and it's one of these types, glycinate, threonate, one of the other types, I know it's not helping them to move their bowels. Among these three, citrate, sulfate, oxide, I don't have like necessarily a distinction between the three of which one.
Right.
What I do know is that the magnesium oxide is effectively the same thing as what you'll find in milk of magnesia. And it's been demonstrated in randomized controlled trials to achieve the effect that we're looking for, which is to move the bowels.
No, and we always say that to our patients who are our listeners that, we're not giving you medical advice. We're giving you information so that you can have a better, more productive conversation with your healthcare provider to make that shared decision-making process go smoother.
Exactly. Smoother.
So, we got this question the other day and I'm glad you're on today because I just got this question from a listener, and it has to do with microbiome and it has to do with constipation. And she said, why doesn't anyone ever mention methane, IMO, or archaea? Archaea. Sorry, I've never heard of that term.
Oh, these are my favorite.
I figured when you start talking about the microbiome and fiber and the things feeding off of each other, I think this is a great place to bring this in. Could you talk about this and explain for people like me who don't really know much about it? I think this is a great opportunity for learning for all of us.
Yeah, this is okay. So this is a quite fascinating topic. Let's start with the microbiome first, which is the archaea. We don't all necessarily have these archaea, but about a third of us do. And archaea are not bacteria, nor are they fungi. They're somewhere in between. And these are hardy, resilient microorganisms that we believe, Jacqueline, we believe that archaea were the first life on the planet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they have this data from, I believe, 3.8 billion years ago of
Wow.
finding archaea inside of a rift vent at the bottom of the ocean. All right. Now, um, oxygen didn't exist on this planet until much more recently, like I believe 2 billion years ago. So these archaea, like they existed when the earth didn't have trees, didn't have anything. It was just like a scorched earth. This shows you the level of resilience of these types of microbes. And you'll find them inside of rift vents, you'll find them in volcanoes, and then you'll find them potentially inside of your colon. And they are what we call methanogens. Methanogen as in methane gas.
Right.
All right, the same methane that that we produce when we pass gas, or that cows produce. We always hear about the cows
Oh,
producing
yeah.
methane gas. That's
Yeah.
global warming, right? All right, so well, methane, that's a normal byproduct of fermentation. It's not to be vilified, because when we produce methane, it's actually because we're fermenting fiber to produce short chain fatty acids. So in a way, like passing gas should be celebrated. Okay. But I fully recognize that it can cause bloating and make you feel unwell. There's an interesting thing about methane. I don't know. Tell me if you've heard about this, where they found that methane actually slows bowel motility. Did you ever hear that?
I think I saw something about that.
Yeah. So it was years ago, and they suspected this, and then they tested it in an animal model. I believe it was a dog, and they pumped methane gas into the dog's belly, and the dogs all got constipated. And
Huh.
so, but then on the flip side, when a person gets constipated, they actually produce more methane gas. And so this creates a vicious cycle where constipation produces methane gas, which produces more constipation. And by the way, bringing that point back to what we were just talking about with fiber and constipation, if you're constipated and you're producing all this methane gas and you drop more fiber in there and you never poop, you're kind of putting gasoline on the fire.
Ooh.
You see? So this is why my argument is get the bowels moving first, then add the fiber second. All right. So that brings us to a conversation about IMO, which is sort of an emerging um, diagnosis in recent years. So IMO standing for intestinal methanogen overgrowth. Basically saying we have too many of these archaea, so we're producing too much methane gas. In my experience, I'm going to share with you what's worked for me with patients. All right. So, and I think that there's a lot to define in terms of understanding small intestine bacterial overgrowth, intestinal.
I was going to ask you about that next, and this is because we get a lot of questions about that, and a lot of patients are struggling with
Yeah,
that.
and part of the issue too is like the information that exists on the internet of people just kind of making up protocols and claiming that they work,
Yes.
right? So it gets quite confusing to patients when we don't have
Yes.
consistent messaging about what's going on and how to treat it. But just to focus on this concept of IMO, where a person is producing too much methane gas. All right. In my experience, every single person who believes that they have IMO, if you ask them, are you constipated? They will say yes, because there's 100% overlap. And in my experience, if you, by the way, the methane production is associated, of course, with bloating. This is the reason why I think that 100% of patients who are constipated, they're bloated. There's other symptoms they could have depending on what's going on, but they're all bloated. And if you treat the constipation and they're adequately moving their bowels, the bloating goes away. From my perspective, we can call it IMO, we could call it constipation. The treatment is the same. Get the bowels moving. And if you get them moving and you keep them moving, that person is going to feel better. I promise you.
And as we talk about going back to food and dietary choices that help our digestive tract, what can we be doing better? And again, it's not a one size fits all, but generally, it's the processed food is doing so much damage to people.
Yeah.
We've seen study after study after study on that. We've seen relationships to the increased incidence potentially in colorectal cancer and younger people.
Yep.
Normally healthy people that are having, getting these cancers.
Scary.
Yeah. So, I mean, how, and it's, we know this, right? Eat clean, eat healthy, but practically what can people do that they don't feel overwhelmed, and what choices, can we make that can better our life?
I would give you this is my number one tip above all else.
Okay. Number one tip.
My number one tip is to add more varieties of plants to your diet. All right. So, this concept I want to explain. It goes back to the American Gut Project, which was actually an international study, not just the United States. It included the UK and included many other countries overseas. And they had over 11,000 people and they had 15,000 microbiome specimens. And the scientists, led by Rob Knight at the University of California, San Diego, asked the question, what is the number one predictor of a healthy gut microbiome? And they measured health within the microbiome as being the diversity of species, this is a standard and widely accepted approach to this, because that's what we always do in any ecosystem. Diversity of species is a measure of health. And so when they asked this question, what they discovered in their analysis was perhaps unexpected. They found that people who were consuming at least 30 different plants per week had the healthiest guts. So I sit here and I talk about the value of fiber. But actually, if we were to distill this down to one rule that I want every single listener to take away from this conversation today, this is the one. I want you to add more variety to your plate. When you go to the supermarket, I want you to hear diversity of plants and add more to the shopping cart. When you're in the kitchen, whatever it is that you're preparing, I want you to ask yourself the question, are there any plants that I could add? Right? Like if it's tomato sauce, I know you could do it. I know you can do it. There's so many options.
Yeah, this is so, I mean, it's so great. It's such great advice. And there's so many great recipes. I mean, online has great recipes, especially for Mediterranean diet, plant-based, with beautiful salads, and not just your typical salad, but you think, just lettuce and tomatoes. There's some really great salads and plant-based meals that even if you're not a full-on vegetarian or vegan, there's some great stuff that I think everyone could enjoy. You have great recipes as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So both of my books, between my two books, I have close to 200 recipes. And every single one of them, I define with the recipe the number of plant points, because it's my way of gamifying this, where you basically say, like, every single time I sit down is an opportunity to like basically accumulate points. And the points are proportional to how many different plants are in the dish. And just to be like totally clear, and I know that you know this, Jacqueline, but I want to be clear with the listeners that this is not an argument for veganism or vegetarianism. And it's not about, I'm not sitting here telling you what to take away. I'm telling you to add. That abundance actually can be the key. And the reason why, just to be totally clear, is that everything that we've said about fiber so far, we get the benefits of that when we eat plants, because every single one of those plants has fiber. But they also have unique polyphenols, which are antioxidant compounds that are responsible for the different colors. So like there's different ones in red versus blue. We get unique phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are plant-based chemicals that many times, like if you were to go to the drugstore, I could point you to all the different things that are based upon phytochemicals that they turn into a drug. You get different forms of resistant starch. Resistant starch is a form of starch Like starch we think of as like a potato or a banana, but there's these types of starch that actually are not digested and they behave like fiber. And so when we eat a varied diet, we get a wide mix of these different things. And when you have a wide mix of these different things, actually it feeds a wide mix of different bacteria. And this is why variety within our diet results in diversity in our gut microbiome, which is a healthy microbiome.
That makes a lot of sense. And, normally I don't talk about products on my show, but I was intrigued by your 38 Terra and the ingredients because it kind of goes along with what you're talking about today. And it brings me to my next question. There's so many supplements on the market, so many things that claim doing this and that for your gut health or your overall health. Can you help us make sense of what, do we need a prebiotic? Do we need probiotics? Do we need additional fiber in the form of a supplement, a powder, a gummy? And these are questions that I get all the time, and I don't know the answer. So that's why we have people like you on the
Yeah.
show.
Well, so I'll tell you. So first of all, you mentioned this, but just clarity of disclosure that I
Yes.
am the founder of a supplement company called 38 Terra, and I'll come back to
I know.
38 Terra in a moment.
Yeah, and we'll do that in a second
Yeah,
because this is intriguing to me because it kind of matches what we're talking
yeah, but
about.
I see no reason to launch straight into 38 Terra when we need to first contextualize
Yeah,
the whole thing,
yeah.
which is that I think that the pounds of food that we consume on a daily basis, pounds, are far more important than a few milligrams or even grams of medicine or supplements, right? This is how we're ultimately going to shape our microbiome is through our food choices and our lifestyle choices. Like that's going to be the dominant driver. And I just want to be completely upfront and clear that every single listener, I want you to apply these concepts of like, for example, adding a diversity of plants to your diet and getting sleep and exercise and giving someone that you love a hug, right? And having social connection and like eye to eye contact, not through social media, but real people looking each other in the eye and talking to each other. Like these are the powerful drivers. These are the levers that we can pull in our life to improve our gut health. And then the question is, okay, so what role do supplements play? Well, you can't out supplement a bad diet. You just can't. All right. You can't take a C minus gut and turn it into an A plus by adding probiotics and prebiotics. But what you can do is you can have a targeted approach that helps to support your gut and achieve your goals. And so there is a place where you're going to do the best that you can in terms of diet. There's no such thing as perfect. So we're all going to do the best that we can in terms of diet and lifestyle, adding in what we can, doing these things. And then acknowledging that there is an opportunity with proper supplementation to potentially take that to a higher level. And that's the potential role. Now, my experience and part of what motivated me to create 38 Terra comes from the fact that you'll never be able to convince me that there's not a place for prebiotics and probiotics because I saw it in thousands of my patients, including ones who had healthy diets, right? They had a great diet. And in many cases, adding, for example, a soluble fiber supplement, which is a prebiotic, adding that to their daily routine was life changing. So I think that there's clearly a place where this can provide benefit. The details of prebiotics and probiotics I would like to dig into. But just to kind of round out that story real quick, I saw this in my patients. The problem from my perspective is that I'm sitting here and I'm telling you that the modern science is basically saying that we need a variety of different types of fiber, of resistant starch, of polyphenols. And that is not what the currently available supplements were providing because they were developed in the 1980s when I was a kid, right? And we have this new science
Yeah.
that's less than 10 years old that we should be taking advantage of. And so I felt compelled, like, gosh, these are clearly helpful, but I think we can do a lot better. And simultaneously, the other problem that I saw is that the supplements that you find in your supermarket, like there's no third party testing. You have no clue what's in there. right? So I felt like there's an opportunity for transparency that people deserve. And that's what motivated me to create 38 Terra. So our first product is called Daily Microbiome Nutrition, and it's basically blending together 7 different plant-based ingredients, several of which have human clinical trials to show what they do in terms of the microbiome and what they do in terms of gut symptoms.
Yes. I noticed the kiwi fruit powder, which is great. 2 kiwi fruit a day help keep the constipation away.
That's
right?
exactly right.
Yes. So I saw that. I was like, this is so great. And I some of the things I recognized, the red beet powder. I mean, that has such great health benefits on its own.
Yeah, and the resistant starch, which is from an ingredient called solanol that has clinical trials that shows that it increases the bacteria in the gut called Akkermansia. And Akkermansia, like there's people who buy Akkermansia probiotics that are extremely expensive. And what I'm saying is you can grow your own. You can grow your own.
Oh.
So anyway, so that's that. Okay, let's talk about prebiotics and probiotics.
Yes.
So prebiotics are food for the microbiome. Now, no matter who you are, it could be me, it could be you, Jacqueline, could be the listener at home. We all have a microbiome. That microbiome needs to be fed. Most of the food for the microbiome should come from our diet. But beyond that, if you take a prebiotic supplement, that's adding more in terms of the food that you're providing to your microbes for them to produce short chain fatty acids. How is that going to work for you on an individual basis? It's impossible for me to be totally clear because you are unique. Your microbiome is unique. So on some level, how that works for you will be unique. But what I do know is that we're feeding you the precursor to short chain fatty acids. And what we're going to get on the other side is a change in your microbiome and short chain fatty acids. All right. Probiotics are what became very popular first. And these are live microbes that have been demonstrated to be beneficial to human health. Now, the problem is there's many different probiotics. There's a lot of variety in terms of how many we give you, what else they're paired with, what sort of capsule it's put into, which can make a huge difference. And importantly, I come back to you have a unique microbiome. So if we take your unique microbiome and we ask the question, what is this probiotic going to do for you? The answer is, I won't know until we try. So the way that we approach probiotics is if you have a specific health issue, which you should, by the way, you should say, okay, what am I hoping to treat? What am I hoping to fix? And whatever that is, let's find the evidence-based probiotic that has a human clinical trial to show that it works for that indication. And then let's try it. And if we take it for 4 weeks and we notice a difference, if you're comfortable with the price, cool. But if you take it for 4 weeks and you don't notice any difference, I think there's a highly compelling argument that this is just not the right one for you. And I would move on.
No, thank you for that. We just did an episode with Dr. Stolman about probiotics, and he said exactly what you said. There is, you have to look for the evidence-based indication and not, I kept asking him like 5 ways from Sunday, because I know that's what my listeners want me to ask. How do we pick the right one for us? And he's like, I can't give you an answer because you don't probably need one necessarily unless you have a specific indication that would show the evidence shows that you would need.
And even if you do, I think that's the other key point is that I agree 100%. But even if you do have a specific indication, because you have a unique microbiome, it may or may not be a fit.
Yeah.
So you have to see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense, but it my mind goes big and I always think about the future and imagine a future. And I know that they're working on this where it could be targeting individual microbiome treatments and targeting specific things that your gut is missing. Yep. I think that's where it's coming. The science is not there yet, but it's definitely moving in that direction, and it's exciting to what could happen
I think
in the
I
future.
think that I think that that concept is like very interesting, and I know that there's companies that are
Yes.
working on it. I work with a company called Zoe, where I'm the U.S. medical director, and we give personalized nutrition recommendations. And we have close to 200,000 specimens within our database of shotgun metagenomic microbiome tests, along with a tremendous amount of other data that allows us to basically run machine learning algorithms to like identify specific patterns. Um, I think that the thing about this is the tricky part. If let's pretend that I have a deficiency of a specific bacteria on testing, all right, does that mean that I'm going to fix my health problems by adding that bacteria back? I don't know that that is true. It's intuitive, but I don't know that that's
Right.
true because the microbiome is so flexible and malleable that missing one bacteria could be compensated by other bacteria that are doing the exact same thing. And adding in a lot more of that one bacteria could actually have a harmful effect. So this is where I believe in some on some level in the body, number one, being allowed the opportunity to balance itself.
Yeah.
So rather than trying to outsmart nature, let's just go back to nature in some ways in terms of eating a healthful diet and allowing the body to work that all out. And then also being attentive to how we feel, where things that we do, if they make us feel better, we lean into that. And if they don't make us feel better, then we have to think about, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by what Zoe. So how does that work? Patients, I mean, that's like the golden ticket, right? Everyone wants to figure out what foods they should eat. Like, so how does that work?
Yeah. All right. So the way that this works, the way that we have set this up, it goes back to research that was done that you may have seen back around like 2016 in the Weizmann Institute in Israel. And basically, what they did at that time is they showed that if you knew a person's microbiome, you could better tell them which foods to eat to control their blood sugar. Right. And sometimes it wasn't intuitive. There were people that you could give them ice cream and they were fine. Which-
Lucky them.
yeah, lucky them. So, all right. So it started with that, and what we did at Zoe, and we were our founder. His name is Tim Spector, and he's a famous scientist in the UK. He's behind all the big twin studies, and they took this concept from the Weizmann Institute, and we basically took it to a whole new level, where we measure a person's blood sugar. So they wear a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks. We measure a person's blood fat, where they'll do at home a little skin prick, drop 2 drops of blood onto a card, and that allows us to measure their blood triglycerides. And we get their microbiome specimen, as well as they are on an app and they tell us what they're eating. And so, like Jacqueline, if you were doing it during the 2 weeks, you would have the blood sugar monitor in. You'd be able to see what your blood sugar is doing, which is kind of fun and interesting. Like you see, like what a specific meal, what the effect is. But also you enter into the app what you're eating, and then we're able to basically like look at this whole picture, what you ate, what your blood sugar did, what your blood fat was, what your microbiome shows. It's a lot of data. Add in your health history. You tell us like a little bit about you, right? So we take everything from that, and then we put this into a big data set, and we use these powerful computers that frankly didn't exist 10 years ago
Right.
to run these machine learning algorithms to say, okay, if we were to clone Jacqueline
Oh, God help us all.
and create a person who's like the exact, like, carbon copy representation of her,
Right.
right? What would we feed that person to like get better control of their blood sugar, their blood fat, their gut microbiome? And
Interesting.
and that's what we feed back to people as a part of the Zoe program. And the Zoe program is basically a program that you follow over the course of about 4 months. And we actually have a clinical trial that we published in Nature Medicine earlier this year in May. I was one of the co-authors.
Oh, cool. I was going to ask you about some any research about it. Yeah,
So we
that's so
have
great.
we have a quite absurd amount of research. Like it's like wild. Like I mean, we may have over 100 papers in total,
Uh,
but the big paper, the one
Yeah.
that like people deserve to hear, because I think that like anyone who's selling you something, they should be able to back up what they have. Zoe, we did a human clinical trial comparing Zoe to U.S. dietary guidelines, And basically what we showed is that Zoe was superior. So they're like our personalized recommendations that are not uniformly the same. They're unique to the individual. That was outperforming people who were actually following what the US government advises us to follow.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's really groundbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think that like if we want to move into this world, like if we sit here today and say we want a world where we have this kind of science, right? Where we have the ability to use the microbiome to do more powerful things. If we want this to happen, I, I have to be completely honest. I don't think that our government is going to do this for us. The grants that they give are very small. And even when they're big, they don't get a lot done. So, as an example, there was this massive grant to study the microbiome and give personalized food recommendations. And they were going to recruit 10,000 people. At Zoe, we passed that number years ago. We're hundreds of thousands of people right now. And it's basically because the concept that we're now moving into is I would characterize it as citizen science, which is that if you become, for example, a Zoe customer, yes, you are a customer. You are a member. You get this personalized plan and all the benefits that come from that in terms of you achieving your goals. Okay, but at the same time, you are contributing your data, your microbiome, to this larger data set that you don't know how many people out there are benefiting from this, but it's basically what empowers us to do this bigger thing. And I think that's kind of cool.
No, it's excuse me. It's so cool. Now it's
Of course.
de-identify, like, because people always freak out. We know that in order for that type of advancement in science that needs to happen, you need amounts of people so you can have the data that can be more specific and targeted to your individual
It's
needs.
big data. It's completely de-identified. It's completely regulated. Everything that we do, we have to go through the proper regulatory channels, including IRBs. We're working with major and like trustworthy institutions such as King's College London, Mass General Hospital, Stanford University. These are our partners.
No, I think I love the science behind it. And I think there's such huge potential. I'm definitely going to check it out.
I'll get you set up. We'll make that easy for you, Jacqueline.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I want to. No, just kidding. Oh God, I've been eating a lot of lentil. Like I'm the kind of person that will make like lentil soup, and again, I don't. It's all vegetarian. It's all like no meat or anything in it, and I'll just eat that like a whole week. I just love it. I need more plants.
Yeah, well, and I think this is kind of the point from my perspective. Like, if we were to look at the American diet, 60% of our calories are ultra processed foods, and 30% of our calories are animal products that have zero fiber, and only 10% of our calories actually come from plants. And sadly, the number one plant is the potato because we eat lots of French fries, right? So, and I think that my point isn't to say, like, it doesn't matter how you would characterize your diet. What matters is quite simply that we try to enhance the representation of the healthful foods. And they come in many forms. But like if we could add more plants to the plate and even just like shrink down the ultra processed food aspect, not that anyone gets to zero. I'm not zero. But like if we shrink that down and we add more plants like your lentil soup, and it doesn't matter whether it's vegan, vegetarian, or whatever we want to characterize it at. What matters is that we are crowding out our plate with more of the healthy stuff, and then we're going to feel better.
This has been just so insightful. I feel so grateful to have you on as a guest. I've learned so much. I hope our listeners have learned so much. Before we go, could you tell our listeners where they could find you online? Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Jacqueline. Yes. So for anyone who wants to follow me, there's a couple free resources that I actually put a lot of time into. So I want people to take advantage of them if they could. One is social media. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook as the Gut Health MD. And then the other thing that I'm really proud of is my email list. So I have a community of about 200,000 people. And I love taking science or gut health topics or people's questions and basically being able to deliver it to this community for their empowerment. It's completely free. you go to my website, theplantfedgut.com, and you just sign up for the email list. And if you don't like it, you can turn it off. It's totally fine. But most people stick around and seem to enjoy it. So, and then last but not least, I have 2 books, Fiber Fueled and the Fiber Fueled Cookbook. I'm very proud of these books. I put, about a year's worth of effort into each. And my supplement company, once again, is 38 Terra. That's the number 38 TERA. And our product is called DMN, Daily Microbiome Nutrition, for anyone who's interested in checking that out.
Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure, and I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.